Hi everybody, Jeannie here, and in this two-part video I am going to be doing tiny critters for earrings, charms, etc. And as usual, you can find me through facebook.com/jeansbeads, and there's my avatar there. The first video I'm going to make is a turtle, but I am making these little critters and flowers and stuff on very skinny mandrels. As you can see, these are 1/16 inch mandrels, much smaller than my normal mandrel, which was right next to that one. And you want to be very careful with these mandrels because they bend so easily, and you can also burn the mandrel right off in the flame. So once you get your glass, once you preheat the mandrel, preheat your bead release, you basically do not want to put your mandrel into the flame. You want to try to keep it out of the flame as much as possible. So you want to work your beads either above the flame, like I'm doing there, it's kind of above the flame, or below the flame, whichever you feel comfortable. I kind of go back and forth. But you don't want your mandrel actually in the fire because you can burn them off. I've done that many times throughout the years. But for this little turtle, I'm just making a little donut bead, just like I would make any other spacer or anything. And this is a pretty small guy. He's really small. And I'm going to just put a little decoration for his shell. You don't have to do this, but I'm just using a little opaque green because he's a transparent green turtle. And I'm putting little opaque dots around. I'm putting them towards the top of the turtle. The bottom of the turtle is towards the holding hand that I'm using to hold my rod. And so I'm putting these dots towards the top of the turtle and like partially down. It's kind of like 2/3 of the way down. And then the bottom's clear. That's where the feet are going to go. So I'm just going to melt those in and reshape to my little donut shape. And in this video series, I'm going to do, in this part 1, I'm going to do this little turtle, a duck, and then a couple little flowers. And then my next video is a little piggy, and then a teardrop shape, which is also a cute shape to make for little drop earrings. So now I have a stringer, which I pre-pulled. It's the same green, just stringer form. And I'm going to put a little dot of glass to represent the head. I'm going to add more glass to this later. But I just want a reference point of where I'm going to put my feet and my tail so that they're not crooked from the head. You know, to try to make them even. So the head is kind of like a reference point. So it really helps to have that, even if it's not a completed head. His head's still a little too small for my liking. But I'm heating up those feet just so that they condense down and I can see what size they are compared to each other. Sometimes it really helps to heat them down a little bit, and then you can really compare the size. And this one foot is a little too big, so I'm heating it and pulling off a little glass so I can get them about the same size. And now it's time for the tail. I put a little dot of glass, and this is a little dot, and I just pull it to the side and make like a little curved tail there. And basically the tail's done. It's such a small piece of glass. And now I'm going to add more glass for my head. I like to have a little bit bigger of a head on my turtle. And I'm going to put little googly eyes on them, which you don't have to do, but I like googly eyes on my turtle. And so I'm going to let my head solidify. I'm holding it downward a little bit so that the head will look upward somewhat. And I'm going to add little tiny dots of white for his eyes on either side. Try to get them the same size. I put a little too much white there, so I pull a little off. And then I'm going to put the pupils, and I think I do the same thing here. I think one pupil was a little bit bigger, so I'm going to pull some of that off. And it's really easy to do when you get it in there. You just want your tool warm, which is basically my rod, warm. And you want the dot hot. and so you could pull glass away instead of adding it. And basically there's the little turtle. And he is very, very tiny. He would make a really tiny earring. See how tiny he is compared to my finger? He'd make a very tiny earring or charm. And so that's why we're using these little skinny mandrels, is for the earring wires or head pins that you use for these things, so they don't wiggle around too much. You want a tinier hole. And so now I'm going to make a duck, and this is going to be a yellow duck, of course, and I already have my pre-pulled stringer there for the little duck parts that I add. It's always convenient to have a stringer available. And so now I'm going to do the same thing. I'm going to make a little donut-shaped bead. I start out by making a disc shape so that my footprint looks nice and my holes look nice and dimpled. And then I let it condense down around the mandrel. And for this duck, I don't want my duck totally round. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to flatten it just a little bit on each side. So I'm just pressing it down just very gently on my marver there. And I make like a little bean shape. So he's a little flattened. He kind of looks like a jelly bean. And now I'm going to add the wings. For wings, I get a dollop of glass melted on the end of my stringer there. And I swipe. You push down and swipe. I kind of melted my stringer a little too much there. It was in the flame. But, and I'm going to do the same thing on the other side, except for this time I'm going to swipe upward because the wing goes up. And so this is the same way you would make leaves. You push down with a ball of glass at the end of your stringer or rod, and then you push it to one side. You kind of swipe it to one side or another to make a leaf or a wing or an arm. It all depends on what you want to make. So I just straightened out those wings there, and now I'm adding a little dot of glass for the tail, and I heat that, and I just pull it out and upward a little bit with my stringer. Just pull it up and you make a little swooped up tail. And now it's time for the head. So basically this doesn't have to be a duck. You can make it you know, a dove or a bluebird. It would just be the beak that would be different. The basic body shape would be the same. So it all depends on what kind of bird you would want to make. So now I have my head. I'm adding a little more glass. I don't think his head was big enough. And then I'm going to add the beak or the bill for this duck. And if it was going to be a beak, it would be a much smaller dot of glass I would add. And then I would pull it out to a point, just like I did the tail. I would just probably pull it out more straight than swoop it upward. But you could also swoop it downward a little bit. You could pull it out downward a little bit. It depends on how you want to shape your birds. But since this is a duck and he's got a bill, I'm adding a much bigger dollop of glass there. And I'm going to flatten it. So I'm heating up the whole orange section of his beak, and I flatten, and then I straighten it out. I squish it the other way too to straighten that beak out. So I flatten it and straighten it. And I do that a couple of times until he has a nice shape. And then I take a little tool, any tool you want, and I kind of curve it upward a little bit. You don't have to curve it upward. I just like a little upward curve to my bills. And so the last thing I have to do for this guy is add some eyes. And I'm not doing googly eyes. I'm just doing small black dots for this duck. And there was a little too much black there, so I had to pull some of that off. Try to get them the same size and in the same position. And there's a little yellow duck. He's kind of cute. So the next thing I am going to make after I put this guy in the kiln is I am going to make a couple of flowers. So these would be, the first one I'm going to make, they're both going to be with this purple petals. Again, a really skinny mandrel, so be aware that your mandrel is really thin and can burn off in the flame and can bend easily. So you want to be gentle with these mandrels. You want to lay on the glass and try not to push your glass around too much when you're working with these, because they can bend so easily, and then your beads don't want to come off if your mandrel's bent. But anyway, so I'm going to make two different types of flowers. Both of them have this olive green and this kind of lavender-like purple. It's the New Purple from a Fetre. I think it's called New Purple. I don't know what number it is offhand. But this first bead, I'm just going to make the petals around this bead, and it's really small. See how big my fingernail is? It's a really small center bead. And this is just to represent, you know, leaves or, you know, the stem or what have you. I could have put yellow on one side to represent stamen, but I just didn't deal with that. I figured most of this center section wouldn't be seen too much because it is going to be a sideways bead. But for the petals, I'm just putting 5 dots around. So a very simple flower design. So I'm putting 5 dots around. You want to try to get them evenly spaced. You don't have to do 5 petals. You can do 6. You can do 4. It's all up to you. And so I melt those dots in a little bit. Not too much because they're going to be squished into petals. But I'm just melting them to see if they're evenly sized. And I believe they seem pretty good, so I don't add any more glass. I was gonna, but then I didn't. So now I want to go around and I want to flatten all these with my tweezers. So I just squish, squish, squish each petal, and then add more heat if you need to heat it up again, and then squish the other 2 petals. So now I'm going to heat the back side of the flower. The back side is towards my holding hand. Make sure all those petals are melded to the base really well, and I can push them in the direction I want them to go. You don't have to curve them upward, but I think it might look better, and plus it covers that base a little bit so you don't see so much of it since it's just green. And so I'm curving them slightly to one side. And so there's a finished flower. You can leave it like this, but I also wanted to show how I make the pointed petals. And so basically all you do is heat the top, it's about 1/3 of that petal on the top, and pull out a little point. If I wanted to, I could heat a larger section of the petal, like half or 3/4 of that petal, and then it would actually elongate the petals even more, and they would be much longer, much pointier, and skinnier. But I just want a little tapered point on the end of these petals. And so that's how you do that if you want your petals pointed. So now I'm going to make a different kind of flower bead. Oh, this is just how to show it would actually hang, you know, upside down or right side up. I was just showing that. But this one that I'm going to make, I'm going to have the same green base, but I'm going to make the flower facing outward. So like if it was hanging on an earring, the flower would face out on the front. You can also put 2 flowers on. You can put one on the front, one on the back. So that way, if it rotated, if you had an earring where it's rotating around, you'd always be able to see at least part of one of the flowers. But for this flower, I'm actually making like a little barrel shape. I'm kind of flattening it out, making it a little wider and barrel shaped. And this is more glass than the previous flower because I need a base where I'm gonna build the flower onto. And so I'm going to put a dollop of yellow, which is kind of like a stamen color representation. But this is actually what's going to hold the petals. And I'll put an extra little dot of the yellow color in the center of the flower once it's done. But I melt that in and I kind of flatten it so I can widen out the section, but I don't want it sticking out too far from the base. And so I have a little dot that's kind of melted in and squished on there. And I'm going to add petals around just like I did on the previous one, except for this section of glass, this yellow glass, is a lot smaller. So my petals, the placement anyways of the initial petals, have to be much smaller dots. So it's a little more tricky to get these dots in there without them totally melting all together. But after I get the initial placement of the dots, then I can add more glass for my petal size that I want. So I'm adding some bigger dollops of glass around, trying not to touch the other ones around it. And sometimes you can heat this a little too much. I think my torch could have been a little too high when I was making these videos. And so you can actually melt them together, but you can fix that. I think this happens here. I think I accidentally melt the bottom two petals, and I'll separate them, so I'll show you that. So now I go around and I just squish them just like I did the other one. And some of these petals aren't perfectly placed. So as I'm squishing them or flattening them, I'm also moving them to one side or another so I can center them up better and even them out with the other petals. And so there, right there is where I separated those two bottom ones because I got them too hot and they melted together. And so I just went and X-Acto knifed them and separated them back out. And so you can always fix that. If it got really bad, you can always pull off those petals and actually replace them again. But it usually doesn't get that bad. And so now I'm adding a little stamen dot in the center to cover up the attachments from the petals because it wasn't evenly round there, and also add a little raised section in the middle. And so now I'm melting like the back side again, just like I did on the other flower. You want to make sure all the petals are melded really nicely, and then also this gives you the opportunity to bend them a little bit and shape them. And so there's a couple flowers for you. I hope you enjoyed part 1 of this video, and join me for part 2 where I make a pig and then a teardrop shape. Thanks for watching.